Welcome to another episode of The Public Square. And joining us today are our esteemed panelists Sanjeev, Anshul, Vedant, Utkarsh, Devabrata, and Shreya.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Public Square. Imagine a manufacturing company in Gujarat has just received a major export order. It needs 2,000 workers within 3 weeks. A labor contractor can bring in workers from Bihar, Odisha, or Jharkhand almost immediately. But outside the factory, the youth is protesting about joblessness. So the company says we hire whoever is available, qualified, and willing to work. So is that an inclusive choice? Hire migrant workers quickly and protect production, slow down and create opportunities for marginalized locals? Or is this the whole choice?
See, migration is one of the ways that labor markets match people with jobs, right? Because work is obviously not evenly distributed across India. Let's say fields like construction, manufacturing, logistics, hospitality, right, and even domestic work, right, often depend on people moving from regions with fewer opportunities to regions with more demand, right? So according to the 2011 census, roughly 450 million internal migrants are there across India, and they move for various reasons, and those include marriage and even family movement, and not just employment. Right? Even with that caution, the scale makes one thing very clear, that mobility is not a side issue in India's economy.
So from an operations perspective, speed matters. So if I miss the export deadline, I may lose a customer and then the future orders and even existing jobs that I have with me. So a contractor can mobilize and train workers who are there in 2 weeks and then solves it again, which solves an existing business problem.
So then why do you think local communities experience this as exclusion?
Because exclusion does not always look like a sign saying local need job apply. Suppose contractor networks circulate vacancies through, say, relatives or established migrant groups. A young person in a nearby Dalit or Adivasi settlement may never hear about the opening, may not have transport to the factory. So both people are technically eligible. One has a realistic route into the enrollment process.
This is exactly the difference between equality and inclusion. Equality says that everyone can apply, but inclusion questions if they ever had the knowledge about the job, the means to reach the interview, and to prepare for it as well. So these are due to structural barriers such as languages, knowledge, caste, class, culture, any of this. And due to such reasons, even if the manager does not want to discriminate, it is like the system reproduces it. And this begs the question: what is the real definition of merit? Is it equal for someone? Is it easily attainable for everyone? So what is the basis of merit? How is it recognized? Is the basic question.
Yeah. So what informal networks basically make is that they make the recruitment process faster, but they also make opportunity invisible, right? So this is why an inefficient hiring process can still be socially unequal.
And when local unemployment sits beside a factory full of workers, so people face relative deprivation. Like they not only ask, do I have a job, but they also ask why the opportunities around me are going to someone else.
And I think that's a very relevant point raised there. These kind of anxieties, they can strongly or quickly take a very political color. So for example, a few years back in Haryana, the government had reserved 75% of the lower paid private sector jobs for the locals. And it had basically triggered a social unrest, though later it was struck down by the Punjab and Haryana High Court, but it clearly shows that how the local jobs going outside or how the reservation of jobs and these topics can become strongly political.
But a quota does not create skills overnight, right? So if I need welders or machine operators, the local pool is not ready. So, but still the production has to continue.
But true but not ready cannot be the permanent excuse. If the companies keep on recruiting from the same network year after year without investing locally, then they may help preserve the same shortage that they complain about.
Now let us think of reverse in the lens. What if migrant workers are the winners in this situation?
Like usually not, because why the migrants workers shift, because either there is no job at their places, or there might be job but they are seasonal or they are getting underpaid, right? So that's why they have to leave their family, they have to leave their community support behind. And migration is often a response to this type of exclusion, and it's not a proof of a privilege. Like if I have to give the example of COVID-19, so when the lockdown, it was very starkly visible that when the work and transport got stopped and migrant workers lost wages, they lost their jobs, their housing securities and everything. So many of them were stranded far from their home. And these are the workers which kept the cities and all the factories running. But these are the ones which got affected the most.
I think social identity theory explains what happens next, right? Because the locals quickly become the in-group and the outsiders or the migrants can quickly become the out-group. So I believe a migrant worker or as in a complex failure of regional development, a complex failure of job creation and other factors such as a failure of education, it is really reduced to a very simpler story, which is of locals versus migrant workers.
See, but then migrants usually respond to gaps that already exist. They do not create regional inequality, they just merely respond to it.
we can also look at it via the capability approach. So a local worker might live near the factory, but he might lack network, he might lack transport. And on the other side, a migrant might have the job, but he might not have the social status, might not have enough health benefits. So both of them have some limited capabilities. It's just the lens that we look from.
And those disadvantages, they are not identical within each group. So
yeah, so exactly, intersectionality matters here. A dominant caste local man with strong networks would fare better than a local woman who has care responsibilities. UN studied that in Tirupur garment industry, there were women from Odisha, Jharkhand, such regions, and they were working under subpar wages, had longer working hours, and didn't have any social or health privileges. So they are just filling labor needs, and they are not made included in the organizations.
Right. So like if I have to summarize your point, so it is like a job can provide them like the income, but it can still exclude them from many of the aspects.
So coming back to the Gujarat factory, we still need those 2,000 workers. So how should we go about it?
So I would say that hire the workers who are doing the job for now, and obviously a company that cannot pause for 6 months while the education and training quality system catches up. So firms did not create again the every regional educational or caste inequality, and they cannot solve all of them.
Yeah, and agreed for immediate order, but responsibility is not all or nothing. I agree that company cannot control the history, but they can control what vacancies are advertised, what contractors they are using and should use in the future, and whether the apprenticeships are paid or not, and whether the workers can report any type of abuse or not. Neutrality is less convincing when the organization can see a barrier and has a practical power to reduce it. This cannot be the entire strategy. The short-term solution is you go with the migrant workers, but in future you build a pipeline for local people in order to skill them for your job, so that you won't ever run out of supply.
That is reasonable again.
Yeah.
For it again, the inclusion as well as it is not interpreted as hiring people who cannot safely perform the work.
Yeah, marginalized locals are not asking for the competencies to be ignored. They are asking for the chance to develop themselves.
See, but this is also where the whole efficiency versus fairness living breaks down, right? Because exclusion itself has an economic cost. That is something that we are not seeing here, right? When capable people are blocked by poor information, inaccessible recruitment process, and lack of short-term training, firms lose potential workers, and then communities that they operate out of, they lose trust.
I think stakeholder theory also changes the question a bit. You know, a decision can benefit the customers, it can benefit the investors, it can benefit the business leader, it can benefit the migrant workers who are coming and working there, but it still feels that the local workers are excluded. You know, good management doesn't only mean that you are recognizing all these effects, but it also means that you are not pretending that only one exists.
So from our current position, what would be a practical inclusive strategy look like? So let's briefly examine how these areas have worked out in different places.
Okay, I think I'll go first. Let's take the case of Kerala, right? So that state has very high literacy rate, it has strong HDI performance across the board, but still Kerala relies heavily on migrant workers from Bihar, West Bengal, Assam and Odisha, right? Employees often report labor shortages in fields like construction, manufacturing and services. So at the same point of time, some local groups perceive these migrant workers as competition for the jobs that they are entitled to. Both of these realities coexist together at the same time.
I think in addition to what Mr. Sanjeev has said, the world model or the model at the international level, which has perfectly championed this, that is on the labor mobility, is the Gulf states, right? You look at the UAE, you look at the Qatar, there a lot of the economic growth has been based on the labor mobility, right? So it denotes the economic value of the labor mobility. However, we are also very aware that there are weaker labor protections right there. So there is a dichotomy you see there, which exists in these Gulf states, because labor don't have much of rights there.
See, even in developed economies like the United States, right, migrant laborers remain central to fields like, say, agriculture. Farmers frequently report labor shortages when migrant flow declines. This suggests that migrants often fill gaps rather than just simply replacing the local workers out there.
I think since you talked about agriculture, I think Germany is another useful example from the European Union. If you look at Germany, then a vast majority of its agricultural sector is supported by laborers from the Eastern Europe. So I think policymakers, should increasingly recognize that it's not either or or question. The economic benefit of labor mobility and the protection of labor rights, they go hand in hand. They should advance together.
As someone from Kerala, the example of Kerala seems really spot on. So across all these different contexts, the lesson appears remarkably consistent. That is, migrants support economic activity, but the inclusion depends on the institutions that it works on. So, from industry expert standpoint of view, what do you have to
So
say?
this connects to my previous point. What I would like to mention is that we'll first focus on recruitment. We'll advertise the vacancies in using local panchayats, colleges, and different local bodies, job portals, etc. and we'll not only be sticking to the previous models that we use, like contractors that we work with, because we want to widen the access to jobs. And in terms of recruitment, I'll not only advertise my current vacancies in a different way. I'll try to create vacancies. I'll not be introducing hiring quotas. I'll try to widen the access. What I mean by that is, I'll partner with local ITIs, local bodies, labor empowerment bodies to create vacancies. And by this, what we'll be essentially doing is, we'll not be redistributing these jobs. It won't be a zero-sum game, and we'll be basically expanding the number of jobs that we have.
And secondly, like create access, not symbolic, just promises. From the community's perspective, trust matters as much as jobs. So people are more likely to accept migrant recruitment if they can also see genuine investment in local skills and then infrastructure.
I would say use a two-track workforce plan. Fill urgent roles with qualified migrant workers, and then partner up with unified ITIs and local training providers to prepare residents for the next recruitment cycle. Set clear goals and timelines and job link targets.
I think that's an excellent idea, because I believe that it improves the resilience of the whole system as well, right? Because a company which is dependent on a single contractor or a single set of migrant corridor, that is vulnerable to disruption. A broader talent pool is basically a risk management strategy, right? And I would strongly encourage all the leaders to stop treating migration as a problem in itself, right? So labor mobility is a strength of a growing economy, right? The real objective should be ensuring that mobility does not come at the cost of opportunity of those who are already living there. Growth and inclusion don't have to be competing goals, right? Achieving both requires deliberate institutional design, and not assumptions that the market will solve everything on its own.
I think inclusion does not only end with hiring. It must be designed, it must be measured, and it should be sustained. Organizations should keep a track of who heard about those vacancies, who applied for those vacancies, who were selected for those vacancies, who were retained, promoted, etc. and etc. Where lawful and appropriate, I think we can also create community-wide databases, as in by caste, by gender, by geography they are coming from, because publishing a simple community-facing summary, it creates transparency. It creates, it distinguishes genuine skill gaps from access barriers, and it holds organizations accountable for their commitment to the local employment, which is basically one of the major topics which have basically the crux of the issue. At the same time, companies must invest in the ecosystem that enables people to take up and come to these areas. So, for example, better healthcare, better transportation or sanitation facilities, all these aspects, right? Because effective demand suggestion mechanism is also, I think, one of the very important measures. Because, for example, in India, which is a very patriarchal society, the males, they are looked at as the protectors of the women. So, for example, when they are the place they are emigrating from or migrating from, if those have very high sexual harassment cases, then in that case, the cost of migration it outweighs the benefit of the increased wage. And so, if, for example, if the migrant also wants to come to another city, let's say in this case Surat, then if the environment needs to be safe for migrant to be able to come to these cities.
And I want to say that organizations should protect migrants as workers, not merely as just a source of labor, right? And we can do this in several ways, by providing them with written contracts, fair wages, or it could be done by giving them safe housing or insurance policies.
And what we can finally do is, we can engage with our surrounding community. We can publish workforce needs. We can publish local hiring. We can ask for the complaints. I'm not claiming that transparency will reduce every problem that we have, but silence will just compound on the mistrust that the community already has.
So to conclude our discussion, we can say that reliance on migrant workers does not automatically exclude the local community. But exclusion occurs more when the recruitment is closed, informal and disconnected from the surrounding communities. In most cases, migrants are not the cause of that exclusion also. They are often responding to the same unequal economy and may face marginalization themselves. So the real trade-off here is not between migrants and locals, but between short-term convenience and long-term institutional responsibility. So organizations may hire migrants for legitimate reasons such as speed, skills, labor availability, etc. But the efficiency should never be an excuse for overlooking barriers that prevent local participation. An inclusive organization neither promises every local applicant a job, nor treats migrants as cheap, disposable labor. So instead, it fulfills urgent vacancies fairly, removes barriers to local access, invests in future capacity, and protect the dignity, rights, and belongings of everyone it employs. Ultimately, the key question is not who deserves the job more, but whether both the migrant and locals have had a fair opportunity to access that employment, contribute, grow, work with dignity and belong. So thank you all for joining us today. It has been a really interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.